If you're looking for a new way to do skin retouching in 2024, then this is the video for you. Now, I've posted many skin retouching tutorials over the years on my channel. However, I've often found that it is very hard to get the right balance of high quality, but also getting things done in a reasonable time frame. And in today's video, I think I've found the thing that is finally going to give that perfect balance. So for those of you who are new to this channel, my name is Kaylee June and I'm a beauty photographer and retoucher based near Sydney, Australia. And in today's video, we're going to be doing a skin retouching tutorial using the new Tamara Williams AI retouching panel for Photoshop. Now, I'm sure most of you probably already know who Tamara Williams is, and she is a very well-known beauty photographer in the community, and she's recently developed a new AI retouching panel for Photoshop that really creates ease of workflow, but also allows you to have a really high-end finish with your work, using a combination of brushes and patterns that you can actually download and purchase along with the panel. And it really does allow you to have that high-end effect while also cutting a lot of time out of your regular workflow. Williams Academy have also been kind enough to offer a 10% discount to all of my viewers, so if you're interested in checking out the panel for yourself, simply use the code K10 and receive 10% off all products on the Williams Academy website. You can also click on the link in the description box below to learn more. So this is how I'm going to be moving ahead with a lot of my skin retouching this year, and I think that you'll really see from this video just how intuitive this panel is and how you can really customize it to your own workflow. But we're going to get straight into the tutorial today, so I hope you enjoy the video. So we're now here in the Photoshop interface. The panel is just over here on the right-hand side. And first off, I'm just going to quickly cover the helping layers because I know a lot of you prefer to use a guide layer or a black and white layer to help you along in your retouching process and specifically with dodge and burn. But essentially how we can use this panel is by simply clicking on the buttons, and this is going to actually help bring up some layers in our layers panel, and you'll be able to see exactly what we're going to bring up in just a second. So I'm simply going to click on the helping layers here, and you can see that here it brings up a group of helping layers. So you've got your solar curve, which you can then click on this box here and that will turn the eye on, which means the layer will be visible. The solar curve layer is a really good one for helping us along with stray hairs in particular. You'll be able to see them a lot better, especially in darker areas or areas with less visibility where it kind of blends a little bit more. This is a really good one for picking up on any little stray hairs that we might be missing in the image. We then have our dodge and burn help black and white layer, so that is the second one down here, and turning that one on will obviously help us with textural variants for when we are dodging and burning, so we can see it a little bit easier in black and white. And then we have our dodge and burn help layer down the bottom here, which is another one that we can really use again to see any little textural differences and even with color differences as well while we're dodging and burning. So you can use several of these at once, or you can just use one at a time, and if you just want to turn them all off, you can simply click on the eyes and making sure that the box is empty. That will make sure that the helping layers are essentially turned off. However though, as you might already know, I tend to not use helping layers when I'm retouching. I just prefer not to. I think that I've done it for so long now without helping layers that I'm happy to just kind of get stuck in and sort of do things a little bit more by eye, but they're very, very helpful, especially if you're a beginner with skin retouching and dodging and burning. So I'm actually just going to click on the arrow with the helping layers here, and we're going to go back to the background. And the best way to use this panel as well for retouching is to make sure that you've always got the top layer or group selected. The only time you won't is in this instance of having the helping layers, as they obviously need to be on top so you can see the entirety of the image when it has those black and white filters and the like. So the really, really great thing about this panel, obviously, that I have been loving is that everything is in the one place. So everything that you need to retouch skin, if you need to use the spot healing brush tool, if you need the clone stamp tool, if you need your dodge and burn, your quick selects, your color correction, details, everything is here in one specific panel, which is really, really good for workflow. And especially because you won't be spending a lot of time making lots of different layers and adjustment layers yourself. And that is time consuming when you're actually adding that into your workflow. So the really great thing about this panel is it's really just a one-click kind of thing. So first off, we are going to be starting with texture. And as some of you may already know, I I do like to use the healing brush tool. So that is going to be this one here. And with this panel as well, it has brushes and textures integrated into it. So you will find that a lot of these tools have a specific brush, or they're very tailored to beauty retouching in that they might have a different shape to the usual tools that you tend to use in Photoshop. And that's the really good thing about it is, again, it's all tailored to beauty retouching. So the first step in my skin retouching process is to remove any little blemishes or small bumps, and that would usually be done with the healing brush tool. So let's go ahead and click on that. And you can see that we've already had a new layer that's automatically come up by clicking that button, and it just says texture adjustments. We also automatically have the healing brush tool now selected, and it is in a specific shape and style that has been tailored to beauty photography and beauty retouching. So you can adjust the brush size as well, and that is exactly what I'm going to do to start off with. And we're then going to remove some of these bumps and blemishes just down here first. So when using the healing brush tool, you'll need to either use Option or Alt on the keyboard and hold that down and select nearby to sample the skin tone, and then proceed to paint over the bump or the blemish to then remove it. So I'm then going to continue doing this and remove any of the little bumps or blemishes that we can see here. And now this won't look perfect at this stage of the skin retouching process, but we will be fixing that up a little bit more later on. Any little bits of patchiness or areas where it needs color correcting. And now I'm going to switch over to the spot healing brush tool just here, and I'm going to start removing again some of these stray hairs here, just because it's usually a little bit easier and a little bit quicker again to remove stray hairs using this tool. Okay, so I've just removed all the little bumps and little blemishes and some stray hairs that have really fallen on the face, but we can always go back and do more to that if we need to, remove any extra little bumps, but I am going to show you what I've just done. So my first original layer with the healing brush tool, this one here, has just removed those small little bumps, and you can see that was pretty easy to do with the help of the panel as well. And with the spot healing brush tool, we've just gone ahead and removed a lot of those little stray hairs on the face, and then we can come back to that a little bit later on if we need to. I'm also just going to make sure I'm on the original layer with the healing brush tool, and I'm actually going to remove some of these little veins in the eyes. So we're just going to hold down Alt or Option for a Mac to then remove some of those small little vessels. And we will come back to color correcting these a little bit later on as well. So moving on to the next couple of tools that I want to go through, and that is the clone stamp tools just up the top here. So you can also see we've got the remove tool here and the AI remove tool as well. So you can use these as a little bit more of a quicker fix for retouching skin. It's likely not going to be as specific or detailed as using these tools and doing things a bit more manually. So that's what I'm going to be mainly covering today. But next is going to be the clone stamp tools. So we have a soft clone stamp and an edge clone stamp. So as you can probably tell by the titles, tools, the soft clone stamp is really going to be for perfecting areas of the skin, slight shadows, and really just kind of softening a little bit of the texture in areas. And then the edge tool is really going to be anything that has an edge. So whether that be a lip color, for example, if we had lipstick that we were working with, we could really refine the edges of the lips a little bit more there. But first I'm just going to click on the soft. We're first off just going to clean up the lip area just a little bit and refine it a little bit more. So just some of these stray hairs we're going to use this tool for, just making it a little bit smaller and then holding down Alt or Option for a Mac to sample nearby. We're then just going to paint really delicately over this particular area of hair. And you can see that's just doing a really good job of removing them pretty much all together. You can kind of do the corners of the lips and just above the lips as well. So it's important not to go too overboard with the clone stamp tool because it can really remove a lot of the texture, and we don't want to remove all of the texture in this instance. We want to have a good amount of it to work with, especially when retouching skin. So just doing a quick before and after on that. So I'm just going to turn that layer off and on, and you can see that's just refined around the lips. Kind of remove just some of those little hairs, and I'm going to continue doing this around the face, just where there's any little bits of facial peach fuzz as well. And for this, I'm actually going to switch over to the edge tool. So I'm just going to click on that, and you can see we've got another layer up, and I'm just going to zoom in and begin doing a little bit more of a harder edge with the clone stamp tool. So just turning that on and off, you can see that that's really just helped to remove some of those little hairs along the edge there, and we can come back to soften this texture a little bit more later on. But for now, I'm going to continue doing the edges here. And you can change the opacity as you go along of your brush, and the flow if you need it to be a little bit softer or a little bit harder overall. Just softening some of this peach fuzz just on this side as well. Okay, so just turning those layers on and off, you can see that that's just sort of softened some of these areas here with the hairs. And the top layer has mainly done around the perimeter of the face as well. And now that we've removed some of those little bits of texture and blemishes, we're actually going to be moving on to Dodge and Burn now. So for those of you who haven't seen how Dodge and Burn works, or you're not really sure how to do it, I have plenty of tutorials on my channel, and I am going to be going through how to use Dodge and Burn with this panel today. But if you do need a refresher of how it all works, there is a couple of more links in the description box below to other videos that will go through it in depth. But essentially, Dodge and Burn is adding light and dark to an image to even out specific areas of the skin tone or the image overall. So to start off with, we've got two main options here. We won't actually be using the 50% gray layer because that is another form of dodge and burn that you can use, and specifically global and macro dodging and burning is definitely my method of choice, and it is one of the most popular methods for professional retouchers and photographers. So we're actually going to start off with the global dodge and burn option here, and we're going to click on that. And you can see here that we've got a few different layers. So as you know, if you've done dodging and burning before, if you do it regularly, it's really good to have two separate layers, one for dodging and one for burning. And it's usually done with the curves layers. That is my preferred method of choice, curves adjustment layers. But having said that, with this particular panel, what it actually does when you select the global option, and for those of you who don't know, global dodging and burning means dodging and burning to a larger section of the image. So a little bit more of an overall effect to the image, whereas the macro option up here will be more for the details of the skin and getting up close and looking at the pores and such. So first off though, you'll see that there are 4 layers here under the global dodging and burning option. We have strong brightening, mild brightening, strong darkening, and mild darkening. So this is a really good option if you want a few different layers to work on that will just be an easy fix to start doing essentially mild brightening or strong brightening, and you don't have to go switching settings or tools or anything like that. It's all there, and those 4 layers have already been designed to help you do a little bit of softer brightening. So that would be softer dodging and softer burning on the mild darkening option, and then obviously stronger is going to be a lot more harsher overall. So let's start with the dodging. I always usually like to start with dodging, and we're going to go to the mild brightening option. And we have to make sure that white is our selected color as we're painting onto a black mask. Now our brush has already been selected. We've got a 15% opacity and 100% flow. So again, you don't really have to adjust your tools and settings all the time. This panel is basically already doing it for you, which saves a lot of time. We're actually going to start dodging just underneath the eye here. And you'll start to see the effect coming up in just a second, because this is quite mild, so we're only just doing really a soft fill in here of dodging. And of course we're dodging in areas where the skin is a little bit darker to lighten that and essentially even out the skin tone overall. So just kind of doing a little bit of dodging in those darker areas here, and just in these areas, anywhere that kind of looks a little bit patchy or a little bit too textured, that's where we're going to be applying the dodge to kind of help even out that section of the skin tone. So I know it can be hard to see what you've done when you're dodging and burning, and even when you're watching someone else do it in a tutorial. So I am going to turn this layer on and off so you can see what that's done. So that's the before, and then that's the after. Before, after. So you can see it's really filled in that section there, and you can really just keep doing it in any spots to help fill in that texture. But after this small explanation of essentially what dodging and burning is, we're really going to be focusing on these layers in terms of doing more of a global dodge and burn, like I said. So we're not going to be doing too many detailed areas with these 4 layers here. So I'm going to make my brush size a little bit bigger, and we're actually just going to start filling in any areas that look like they might need a bit of dodging. Now I do like to start off with dodge and then kind of switch back and forth between dodging and burning as I retouch. But the ultimate goal here is really just to essentially smooth the skin a little bit more. And just showing you a quick progress. So before, after, before, after. And now I'm actually going to switch over to the mild darkening, which is going to be the burn tool. And we're going to just fill in some of these areas here that look a little bit light. So if you have personal preferences for any brushes you're using in conjunction with the panel, you can really easily save these settings by holding down Command and clicking on one of the buttons over here. You can also do this by holding Control on a PC and clicking on the button as well. So for example, if I was to click on the global button here, you'll see that my brush settings are currently at 15% opacity and 100% flow. Now, if I wanted to change these to say 100% opacity and 1% flow, which is my usual settings, I could simply just make sure that the brush tool is selected, opacity is at 100 and 1% flow, and then hold down Control and click on the global button if that was the button I was wishing to change. And you can see there that it says saved. So if I was to add another global action, you'll see that it's not automatically set to 15% opacity, it's set to my new settings. Now, if you want to reverse this and go back to the default settings, you can easily do this as well. And to do that, you can just hold down Option, Alt, and click on the same button for a Mac. Or for a PC, you can hold down Shift, Alt, and then click on the same button again. So I'll do that to global, and it will give you a prompt that says, are you sure you wish to reset the tool options? And we can go ahead and click reset. So the next time that I bring up a set of global layers, you'll see that the opacity is 15% and that the flow is back to 100%. So just to demonstrate, if I bring that up again, you can see they're back to the default settings. But for now, we're just going to stick to 100% opacity and 1% flow. So I'm just going to continue filling in some of these areas, and we're just kind of staying a little bit further zoomed out for this because, as I said, this is the global dodging and burning option. And then go back to the mild brightening. And you can make your brush size a little bit bigger to help kind of dodge and burn larger areas. And at this point, I also like to go over the brows as well and some of the eyelashes just to darken them up usually. And you can do this by going into the strong darkening option, which is going to be a lot easier at darkening them a little bit more quickly and making them look a little bit more strong. So just turning that on and off, you can see that's made a really big difference. And just running it over the lashes as well. So before, after, before, after. And then I'm going to continue doing a little bit more global dodging and burning, and then we're going to be moving on to the macro option. Okay, and doing a quick before and after of all of these layers. So this is before doing the global dodging and burning, and then this is after. Before, after. Before, after. And another really great thing to do when you're dodging and burning is to really utilize the opacity function just over here on the right hand side. So this happens to be in conjunction with the layers that we've been working on. And if you do feel that you've gone too far with any of your dodging and burning, you can simply just move the opacity slider right down or around the middle, or wherever you think that it's giving you the best effect with skin retouching. So for example, if I felt that at 100% was too much, I could just bring the dodging down a little bit to say around 60% for a little bit more of a natural effect. You can do this with each of the layers, and I quite often do this while I'm dodging and burning, and especially if I feel that I've gone a bit too far. So you can see there that that has just made a little bit of a difference compared to having it at the full opacity. But for now, I'm going to keep both of these at 100%. So now we're going to move on to the macro option. So making sure I've got my top layer or top group selected, I'm then going to select macro. And now we've got a couple of different options for macro. Now, as I mentioned, this is all going to be a lot more up close and a little bit more looking at pores and looking at the closer aspects of the face. So essentially what we're going to be doing here is working on the pores, and fixing for brightening is the other option we've got. So if we click on that particular layer, we can actually just paint straight on to the image, and you'll see if I turn the eye on and off, that actually helps bring a little bit more of that texture back, which we've just dodged this area on the other layers for the global dodging and burning option. And you'll see that it just kind of takes the edge off that brightness that we've added. So it helps kind of like make that texture stand out a little bit again. So we're actually going to be doing a little bit of that and then working on the pores. And then we'll also be working a little bit more at the pore level. So sort of going in here and making my brush a bit smaller, and then just kind of filling in some of those smaller areas of the pores. This is what macro dodging and burning is all about. I also have called it local dodging and burning on my channel before. So this is just a bit of a stronger adjustment layer to kind of fill in those darker little spots near the pores. So before, after, before, after. And you can see it just really evens out that area. And I'm just going to continue doing this. And then also switching back as well to my global dodging and burning. Okay, so this is what it looks like after our global and macro dodging and burning. So for the macro, here's the before and after. So I'm going to zoom in and show you a little bit closer up with that one. So before, after, before, after. And then going down to global, before, after, before, after. And now I'm going to move on to a couple of other exciting features of the panel. So if we go to our macro group, just to make sure we're at the top layer or top group, we're actually going to go down to the quick select menu now. So the quick select menu is amazing because it's actually going to select certain parts of the skin tone and really allow you to play around with them in terms of using other adjustment layers or brightening things or darkening things really, really easily. So let's click on skin for now. And you'll see that only really the skin is selected here. And if I zoom out, you'll see that a little bit more. And the main part of the skin is selected. So for example, let's bring up a adjustment layer. So let's go down to curves. And let's move this particular layer up. And you can see that it really mainly affects the skin tone overall. So let's just kind of give it a little bit of a brighten here. And let's do a quick before and after there. You can see it's just added a little bit more light. And I'm actually going to add a little bit more contrast to that and just bring that down a little bit, just to add a little bit more contrast there in the skin tone itself. So this can be a really helpful selection for color correction or for brightening, darkening, as I said before. And we're actually going to move on to the highlights as well and select that. So we'll just click on that button. And you can see it easily selects all the highlights in the image. So let's bring up a levels adjustment layer this time, and we'll move across the arrow, and you can see it's only really adjusting the highlights in the image. That's great if you really want them to stand out a little bit more. So I'll just move that up a little bit, and turning that on and off, you can see it's really just helped to highlight that specific part of the skin tone. And then we also have the shadows of the image. So let's click on that one as well. And again, I'm going to bring up a levels layer. So this is really good for just adding a little bit of contrast to these areas. And you can really just move that across, or we can move the midtones across a little bit more. So we'll just move that across a little bit, and turning that on and off, you can see it's just made the model's face stand out even more in the image. So let's do a quick progress report here of what we've done so far. So back to the original image, and now this is what we have now. So you can see the skin tone looks really amazing. So before, after, and making sure that our macro layer is selected again. We are now going to move on to a bit of color correction with the skin tone. So let's go down to the color correction panel just here, and we're going to click on skin tone. And this is a really, really great option that I've been experimenting with, because it actually allows you to pick a skin color to really help create that little bit of cohesiveness with your image as well. Because you'll often find that with a lot of beauty photography and portrait photography, the color of the skin tone may not match in certain areas. It might be a little bit patchy, or from the body to the face, like even in this image a little bit, you can see there's a difference in skin tone. So the really easy thing is there's actually an adjusted skin tone option that's already been applied side. And we can simply just paint it through using a paintbrush tool and with white selected. So if we just paint that back using this particular tool, you'll see that the skin tone just changes a little bit. Now you can paint the entire thing through, which is what I'm doing just now, or you can be a little bit softer with your brush settings. I'm actually going to just drag this down the bottom here as well. And let's just do a quick before and after of this. So before, after, before, after. So it's really just creating that cohesiveness with the skin tone. And then you can also see that there's other layers attached to it below. So this is the main one that we're actually looking to bring through here, and we can actually just adjust the skin tone by moving some of these sliders around here with the selective color adjustment layer that it is. We can move the yellows down a little bit, move the reds up a little bit more. So turning that on and off, you can see it's just helped to get a little bit more warmth back into the skin tone overall. And then you can also turn this layer on here, which will allow you to adjust the yellows on this black and white layer and the reds mainly. And that will actually help to gain a little bit more depth with the skin tone. So I really like using this option to just pick up a little bit more texture and give the skin tone a little bit more depth. So just turning that on and off, you can see that that's really just added a little bit more contrast overall, and turning it all on and off, it really just gives a totally different effect to the skin tone and really kind of gives it that more of a high-end editorial look overall. Now, like I said, there's also an option for manual color correction, which we won't really be going through in this tutorial, but I am going to go down to pick skin tone here because this is what I was talking about in terms of the undertone for the skin tone. So this one is currently selected. However, there are other options. If you don't want it so warm or so pink, you want it to kind of retain that little bit more of a porcelain effect, you can use this first option here. This was the second option that we just used. The third option is a little bit more deeper and warmer again. And then again, we've got a little bit more of a slightly desaturated skin tone at the end here. But I'm thinking for this image, it's between tone 4 and tone 3. So turning this one on, it's very similar to the original skin tone of the image. So if we turn this whole group off, you can see what the original was and then what it is now. So it really does match in with the original undertone. However, if we were to go back to skin tone number 3, that's giving it a lot more of a warmer effect overall. So I actually like both effects, but I think I'm gonna stick with number 4, only because it really did match the original undertone of the skin tone. And you can actually layer these as well, which is kind of good if you want a little bit more of a warmer effect. So for example, if we want this original skin tone kind of picked here, and then we want a little bit more warmness, we can actually move the opacity down on this layer, just to kind of have a little bit more warmness overall added. But mainly we're using skin tone number 4 here. So let's do a quick before and after of the skin tone color correction. So let's go before and then after. Before, after. So again, if you feel like you've gone a little bit too far with the skin color correction, you can adjust the opacity of this layer. I'm just going to adjust it to maybe just around the 80% mark, and just turning that on and off, you can see what a difference that has already made. And now we also have another option here for color correcting blush, which I'm going to click on. And you can actually change the color of the blush. So I'm actually going to double click on the solid color here. And we're actually going to use just the eyedropper tool to kind of find the undertone of the blush. And it's kind of a bit more of an orangey blush. And I'm going to really just choose a color that really matches in with that a little bit more. So pressing OK, I'm then going to click on the layer mask. And you can see that this layer is only at 13%, so we're going to just do a really soft correction on that. And turning that on and off, you can see that's really helped to just replenish the blush that was kind of starting to blend in a little bit too much with the skin tone over here, and now we've kind of rectified that issue just there. So the great thing as well is you've got a similar option for the lips to color correct too. So I'm just gonna make sure our top layer is selected here and then select lips. We're gonna stick to the darker lips option because we just wanna darken some of the spots on the lips here. I'm simply going to have white selected and then just use a really low flow and just kind of paint onto the lips now. And that will just kind of help fill in a little bit more color. Again, if you want to change the color at all for the darker lips option, you can just double click the solid color. And you can see that's really just enhanced the lips a little bit more. So turning that on and off, you can see it's also filled in the gaps of the lip gloss as well. But if you really want to, you can just essentially click on this layer or this layer here, and you can just adjust the opacity a little bit. And I think that that's pretty good overall. Now moving on to some of my favorite parts of this panel. I really enjoy these next options that we're going to talk about. And that is going to be the details and the skin texture. Now, as I said, my favorite part of this is really going into the details section. And one of those options we're going to look at right now is going to be the freckles option. So making sure we've got our top layer selected, we're going to click on freckles. Now, as I mentioned, some of these options in the panel actually use brushes and they also use patterns. So they're kind of interconnected here, and you're going to be able to use a lot of these different brushes specifically here for freckles. So you can see here as I scroll down, you have so many different brushes to select from here when it comes to freckles, and you're really going to be able to tailor this to your own photos and what looks good. So a really easy way to group some of these brushes into a favorites folder for later, just to make things easier to access, is by navigating up to the brushes tab just up here. And then you can see currently we've got the freckles group open. However, you can save any brushes into your favorites folder. And if you want to save any of the iris brushes or the lashes brushes that we'll go through in just a second, you can also save those into a favorite folder as well. It's totally up to you. But for example, if we wanted to select a few of the freckles brushes here and maybe keep them in a separate group, just so we can access them specifically easier later on, you can hold down Control or Command for a Mac and start to select the brushes that you'd like to save. So let's just select a few here. We can then right click and say export selected brushes. Now you can save these wherever you like on your computer, and you can name the group anything you like as well. So for this one, I'm just going to name it Freckles Favorites. And then click save. Then you just need to navigate to wherever you saved the group. So in my case, it's just in my downloads here. So I'm going to click on Freckles Favorites and double click it. And if we move down to the bottom here, you'll see that I've got freckles favorites just down the bottom. I've got another favorite section there, but this is where our freckles have now gone. If you simply drag and drop these brushes into another group that you've created internally here, it will remove it from the original group. So personally, this is just how I like to save my brushes, and it acts as kind of a duplication, so we don't need to necessarily lose them from the original groups. So then I would just simply move the freckles favorites group right up to the top, where I can easily access it as the first set of brushes. So don't forget, if you are in the brush settings section, you can easily navigate to the brushes by clicking on this button here, and you'll see by scrolling to the top, our favorite brushes are already listed just here. Or alternatively, you can go through this section here and easily access all of the brushes. So just clicking that away, I've got my brush here with the freckles selected, and I'm going to just make the brush size a little bit smaller. So usually for this, I would choose the color as being something a little bit darker to help it stand out in the skin tone. A little bit darker is easier to bring down the opacity a bit later on too if you feel like it's gone too far, but it'll make it a lot easier for you to see them as you're applying them too. So I'm just using kind of a dark brown color, and then we're actually just going to start painting onto the skin tone. So this is a really good shape for just over the nose here. So let's go back to our brushes again, and let's have a look at some other areas of freckles we can use. So let's have a look at this one. So you can just kind of paint them. You can use different sizes of the brushes as well to kind of get a good variation in the freckles. I don't like to go too overboard with this, but this is especially good for any models that you're working with also that do have freckles, because you'll find that when you're dodging and burning, sometimes it does tend to fade the freckles a lot. You can also add a bit of a Gaussian blur to these, which is what I usually do if I'm adding some freckles. I don't really think that it needs it in this particular instance, but we can also move the opacity down on these to make them a little bit more blended in, or we can make them a lot more standout as well. Obviously, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep them really natural looking. The only thing I'm going to just kind of adjust a little bit more here is going to be the top layer here. And we're just going to switch the color to black. and just kind of paint just a little bit more on those areas to not make them so stand out. And you can use this brush actually to paint on top of them, and it actually just makes it look a little bit natural. So turning that on and off, you can see that that's helped just add a little bit of texture to the skin. So I'm actually just going to adjust these just a little bit further down, maybe to around 35%. And I feel like that's kind of a good little subtle amount of freckles on the skin tone. I really like how that looks. Now I really want to go through a couple of the other brushes that you can add into your photographs, as I think that they're really, really helpful, and especially if you haven't photographed something to your liking. So for example, we're actually going to go into the iris brush first, and we're just going to make sure our top layer is selected and click on that. So we've got our three main layers here. We've got our masking out layer, we've got our iris layer, and we've got our highlight. So the iris is really going to be the color of the eye, and if we want to paint on a slightly different color to make it more vibrant. And then we've also got the highlight section here. So if we click on the highlights mask, you'll see that we've got white as the selected color. Now I'm just going to do a quick demonstration with one of the iris brushes here, and there's so many different ones to choose from. And if we just simply click, making sure that white is our selected color as we're painting onto a black mask, you'll see that it really just lifts the iris and really gives it a different effect. And you can easily clean that up as well by switching to black and then just simply painting at the top there. But if I turn that on and off, that's really just given it a little bit more texture, a little bit more life overall. And let me just zoom out. So you can see by turning that on and off, it really helps to just add a little bit more interest into the photo. So if we go back, we can also choose a different iris brush. You can also just use the ones that kind of have, it's like a bit more of a half style brush where you can just simply click. I'm just going to change that back to white. And there you can have half of the iris kind of illuminated. So turning that on and off. There's so many different brushes you can experiment with here. So turning it on and off again, you can see that it makes such a difference. And then by clicking on the iris, you can also paint by just using a regular brush. And I would probably do this at maybe a 1% flow. And then you can just kind of paint a little bit more color onto the iris if you need to just make it stand out a little bit more. So turning that on and off, you can see that really just adds a lot more vibrance. And you can also easily change the color of the iris for whatever eye color you need. The default is just blue at this time. And I think this is a really creative option to really get some interesting effects, especially with the iris. For now though, I am going to delete these layers though, because I do want the irises to have a very natural effect for this particular image. But I do love being really creative with these brushes. I think that you could really experiment with these all day long. So I'm just going to quickly delete that group. And then now making sure that the top layer is selected again, I really want to show you the eyelash brushes. So if I go to the details here again, and we go to the lashes and click on that, you'll see again, we have a bunch of eyelash brushes here to choose from. There are so many, and they're actually labeled left and right. So if you go out to the brushes panel again and scrolling down to lashes, you'll see that you have different categorizations as well. So you've got full top lashes, and then full bottom lashes, full lashes overall, so top and bottom. You've got individual lashes, and then you've got pairs. So these will be like a 2 at a time kind of style. So I think that it's really great as well that this is an option, because quite often eyelashes can get very clumpy on set. Unfortunately, lashes are very difficult to make them look good close up because they can be so fiddly. So just zooming in though, I am going to test out a full top layer here. So you can see that they're labeled right and then left with R and then L. So with the left, that is what we'll need for this particular eye. And this is quite a natural set. So I'm just going to make sure that the right color is selected as well first. So holding down Alt on your keyboard, you'll get the eyedropper tool, and just hold Option if you've got a Mac and click somewhere in this darker area just to get the color right. Now I'm just going to stamp this tool. It's not positioned right, but I'm going to show you how we can actually fix this in just a second. So just clicking, you'll see that that actually looks really, really natural. But to actually maneuver these lashes a little bit more and get them into place a little bit better, all we have to do is hold down Control and T on the keyboard, and that will allow us to transform the lashes. So the best way to do this as well is to right click and then select Warp. Then you can move these little points down and wherever you actually need them to be. So you can kind of really move the lashes. And you can actually do this for any of the brushes we've spoken about in this tutorial. So all of the brushes that you download, you can transform them and fit them to really look as best as possible on your subject's face. So if we just move these in a little bit more, you'll see that they're really natural and they're really easy to position. Now, if I press enter and I turn that on and off, you can see how much of a really big impact that makes. Now, you can do another few things to this to make that look really natural. You can add a slight Gaussian blur and just maybe do it by about, say, 0.7 pixels or so, and that just kind of softens it a little bit more. And you can also add a mask to this, and using just a regular brush, we'll just click on black as the selected color, and making sure that the flow is a little bit higher, you can just change the opacity a little bit or remove some of the lashes if you feel like they look a little bit too much there. You can even remove the tops. This is all very customizable and absolutely to how you would prefer to retouch. So let's zoom out a little bit with this one. So you can see there's the before and there's the after. Before, after. So it's another really cool effect with the brushes that you can achieve, and you can really spend all day experimenting with them. But as I said, I am going to keep this image looking very, very natural, so we will remove this layer before moving on. So I'll just drag this down here. Making sure I've got my top layer selected, I'm just going to bring up the Tamara Williams panel again, and then we're going to move on to the skin texture option. So this is where some of the patterns come into effect. And again, this is one of my favorite features of this panel, and it's going to be adding skin texture. This is such an easy and quick way of doing this, and it actually probably is my favorite part of the panel overall because I've not really seen much like this. Now, if we go into add here, so let's go to add, and then let's choose a skin texture highlight. Now you can see it's just a regular layer mask again, and we're just going to paint using white onto the image, mainly over the highlighted area. Now, can you see how much texture that has just added? So turning that on and off, you'll see that that's looking a lot sharper, a lot more detailed overall. So before, after, before, after. I just think that it's such a great effect. So you can really have a little bit more detail where you need it. So I'm also just going to do this on the forehead a little bit and just on the chin to kind of really sharpen up those highlights a little bit more. And then you can actually adjust this, which is really good. So you can adjust this by kind of moving that up if you want the radius a little bit more higher. And then you've also got the highlights here, you can bring them down or move them up, and the shadows as well. So they really are easily adjustable, which is just so, so good. Now let's add another one. So we'll go into add, and we'll go into cheek pores individual because we are lacking a little bit of texture just on the cheeks here. So let's zoom in, and I'm just gonna swipe the brush just over this section. Now again, you can choose the radius of this to be whatever you really want it to be. But I feel that it looks good with a larger radius in this instance. And then you can bring the highlights down if you want it to be a little bit more blended, and the shadows as well. So look at that. So if I turn that on and off, you'll see that there's just a little bit more texture that gets added there, but it's still fairly subtle. And if I keep painting on the cheeks here, it's just going to help give a little bit more texture overall. And there's actually a really cool option for the end of this, which is amazing. I really, really love using it. And it actually will just finish off the entire image with a really nice texture. So again, it's all very easily adjustable, and you'll be able to make adjustments as you see fit. So if we just click on finish, you'll see that it adds like an entire texture to the image, and it really helps sharpen up the image overall. It's got a little bit of contrast in it too. So let's just move the opacity down a little bit with that, maybe down to, let's say, around 26%, and that's kind of giving it still a little bit of sharpness. So before and then after. A little bit hard to see at the end here because it obviously is the finer texture details. So before, after, before, after. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and just used the clone stamp tool to just remove the perimeter of those stray hairs. But overall, this is how you can retouch fast by using the Tamara Williams Academy panel. And it is really cutting out a lot of time from my workflow lately. So I highly recommend it to anyone that is looking to kind of take that next step with their beauty retouching, and use some tools as well that allow you to kind of have that real attention to detail, especially in skin retouching, because sometimes it can be hard to kind of get that detail you need in Photoshop. And I do find that having these pre-made brushes and tools ready to go is just going to make your life so much easier. So let's do a full before and after here. So taking a snapshot, we'll go back to the original image. So this is the before, and then this is the after. So before and then after. And now let's do a quick zoom in so you can really see the attention to detail that we've had here in the skin retouching. So before and then after. So again, if you're really looking to kind of take that next step with your beauty photography, I really recommend using this retouching panel, because it's really going to allow you to have that attention to detail and allow you to have that really nice finishing touch to your work. I've really enjoyed using the panel recently, and I'll definitely be implementing it into my workflow in future, because it is going to cut out a lot more time and really just give me that professional effect overall. But overall, I hope you guys have really enjoyed this tutorial and learned something new.